Welcome to the Her Health Podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk, where we empower women and girls to take charge of their health and well-being. Join us as we shine a spotlight on issues affecting women and girls' health and explore ways to create positive change. Get ready to be inspired and empowered as we discuss health, advocacy, and empowerment for women and girls at risk. Please be advised that this podcast may cover sensitive topics such as gendered violence. We understand that these discussions can be difficult to listen to. If you feel uncomfortable or need support, we encourage you to prioritize your well-being. Consider exploring our other podcasts if these topics are triggering for you. Resources can be found in the description.
Welcome to the Her Health Podcast. I'm your host for the day, Dr. Sarah Yercich. With the Alliance Against Violence and Adversity, I'm an early career researcher, and I also host the webinar series and, in many instances, the podcast, although there are many hosts for our podcast. Aside from my work with AVA, I am the co-director of the Frida Center for Research on Violence Against Women and Children in Vancouver, British Columbia, and faculty in Sociology and Criminology at Capilano University. In today's episode, we interview Hannah Ellison from Battered Women's Support Services, who discusses family law protection orders and peace bonds. So that you can get to know a little bit about Hannah, Hannah is a dedicated legal professional with a strong passion for social justice, women's rights, and advocacy. She holds an LLB from Durham University in the United Kingdom and an LLM from the University of British Columbia, where she specialized in human rights and reproductive laws in England, Wales, and Canada. Based in Vancouver, she works at the Battered Women's Support Services, providing family and immigration legal support and advocacy for survivors of family violence. Welcome, Hannah. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. To start, can you please tell me a bit about your work at Battered Women's Support Services and in the Justice Center?
Yeah. So as a legal advocate at the BWSS Justice Center, I have helped survivors of family violence navigate the family law system and the immigration law system. When it comes to family law cases, that often looks like me having appointments with survivors, discussing their options, discussing either their ongoing family law matter or they have just left and they're asking, what can I do? What are my rights? What do the arrangements with my children, for example, look like? With immigration law, that looks like me preparing submissions for temporary resident permits and open work permits for survivors of family violence under a special category. And we send those applications to IRCC, and then that gives the survivor 1 year open work permit so they can get on their own 2 feet. Yeah. Oh, additionally, there's a lot of communication with Legal Aid BC and ensuring that these survivors can get a lawyer where they are eligible.
That's great. It's such important and needed work, especially when you think about like the nexus of family violence and immigration, all the issues that creates for survivors and their families.
Mm-hmm.
I also know that Battered Women's Support Services provides wraparound services in general for survivors. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah. So aside from the Justice Center, we also have counseling services. And we have specialized counseling services for Latin American women so that they can access support in Spanish or Portuguese. We also have short-term support workers who they will assist survivors of family violence in that crisis situation. And they can assist with safety planning, like detailed safety planning, housing concerns, finding immediate transition housing, and navigating the criminal justice system. We also have the crisis line, which is where our files come from. The majority of them come through the crisis line. And we have support groups offering a space for women to either access community support from other women going through the same or similar situations. And we have more structured support groups as well for learning. We also have an employment program, and we have a program specifically for Indigenous women.
That's
so there, one-stop shop.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's just a one-stop shop for everything.
Well, as we learned a lot more about, how we can meet people's needs and promote safety, I think wraparound, holistic, and trauma-informed services are the way to go, and it's so amazing that your organization provides that. For our listeners, can you also explain a little bit about what family law protection orders and peace bonds are and how they are typically used to protect survivors of gender-based violence?
So family law protection orders and peace bonds are both police enforceable legal mechanisms for protection for individuals. Family law protection orders are court orders for anyone at risk of family violence specifically. So that's often a husband, common law spouse, ex-husband. Whereas peace bonds are for anybody who reasonably fears that another person will cause injury to them or their property. When we talk about gender-based violence, the family law protection orders are for survivors of family violence, and statistically, we know that it is women who are most commonly victims of family violence. However, the restriction of the protection order is that it must be a family member. So that's where peace bonds can close that gap for individuals experiencing gender-based violence from someone who doesn't fall within that family category, for example, a boyfriend or a casual partner.
Thank you. I think that's really important for those who are listening to this to have a little bit of background context. So a lot of focus of what we're talking about today is actually the report that you assisted in researching and authoring called Justice or Just a Piece of Paper, which for our listeners, you can find it on the Battered Women's Support Services website. And in this research, it highlights some common misconceptions about these legal mechanisms. Can you share a few of these and explain why they persist?
Yeah. So a first common misconception is about enforceability. The myth that they're not police enforceable. We know that they are. Another misconception is about eligibility. For example, a myth is that where there's no physical abuse, then they're not eligible for a protection order. The legislation doesn't say that. In practice, obviously, it's more difficult to prove not physical abuse, but it's not a restriction. And another misconception was that some survivors reported they believed that they couldn't get a protective order because they had never reported an incident to the police in the past. And I think when it comes to why these myths persist is that the misinformation is like largely connected to police action. What they say, what they do, more importantly, what they do not do. For example, a survivor recently told me that police advised her no bruises, no restraining order. A restraining order is not a term used in Canada anymore. And secondly, that's just incorrect. Police are unfamiliar with the meaning of family violence. And I think we need the police to familiarize themselves with the broad scope of family violence, since they are the enforcement mechanism for these orders. Yes. So with the police, there seems to still be a what happens at home is not our problem. Like behind closed doors, it's a family matter. We're going to stay out of it. But this isn't the case anymore, and human rights has moved forward internationally. We know that that's not a private sphere anymore, that the state doesn't belong in. Because all people need protection from violence. So when it's happening at home, it's more often women that are being harmed. Um, so if the state's only protecting this public sphere and they're not protecting the family unit, then they're not protecting women. So that I think the reason that these misconceptions persist is largely due to the police.
It's always shocking sometimes when you hear that a lot of the things that you think that we as a society, or even especially in the anti-violence sector, have gotten past, and then it's like, no bruises, you have nothing to show for it, even though we know violence is so much more complex than that, and that a lot of the time the visible physical harm isn't the most harmful thing a survivor is experiencing. So with kind of the myths you've discussed in mind and anything else that came out of your research or your work, what challenges do survivors often face when trying to obtain protection orders and peace bonds?
So the challenges that they face with the process is the misinformation and the continued fear of abusers. Um, and whilst in theory the legal process is comprehensive, um, because for example, with family law protection orders, the provincial court application form it's very user friendly. It has instructions down the side. It indicates what that question is actually asking. And that form becomes an affidavit to which applicants are encouraged to attach evidence. Um, and again, another benefit is that the rules of evidence are typically relaxed in these hearings. And again, they can file the form without notice, see a judge the same day, and if it's necessary, an order can be made without the abuser knowing. But like a main challenge is that it's difficult to convince a judge that family violence is likely to happen where it's not physical. And that is just the situation we're in, unfortunately. Um, because where it's a pattern of control, that's so difficult to evidence. Um, so there's the lack of understanding, the difficulty with proving, and the continued fear of evidence. And then another main challenge was that survivors did not feel the order was going to do anything for them, which means that there was a lack of faith in the enforceability mechanism.
Yeah, it sounds like you're speaking kind of to a lot of gaps as well in the legal process. For example, a need for maybe more judicial training. Are there any gaps in the legal process that relate to some of these challenges you identified?
I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss anything. Yeah, so the gaps in the process, I would say, are caused by a lack of communication between the arms of enforcement and granting the order. So there needs to be some kind of information sharing between them as to, look, this order's been made because of this. You don't need to make any judgments anymore. You just enforce it. And then the gap is also there in terms of knowledge. Like when these actors are starting at different levels of understanding, even if we'll move forward, great, like that's never going to be equal until we reassess. Everyone needs to be on the same page. I hope that answered the question.
Absolutely. And it's always when we start to think about these big gaps and these big challenges, it's often like breakdown in communication, or even for BC, for example, for those who are listening who don't know, we have these silos kind of between criminal court and family court, and it's caused a lot of safety issues for survivors in our province. Now, you talked a little bit about kind of like information understanding, and the next step that comes to mind for me is enforcement of protection orders and what a critical issue that is. From your experience, what factors influence whether these orders are effectively enforced, and how can that be improved?
From our research responses, it seems that enforcement is very much dependent on where the survivor is. Like if they report a breach in an area of BC that is responsive to the breach reporting, then great. We see that police can respond quite quickly and they'll take it seriously. However, just 20 minutes down the road, a different survivor may make a report of a breach, and that the police or RCMP that serves them doesn't take it seriously. And really disappointingly, we had a lot of responses say that police just didn't respond. And then in that instance, everyone is losing faith with these pieces of paper that aren't working.
It's the action is what matters, and it's so apt in your report title and also in what you said that it really is just a useless piece of paper if it doesn't provide the necessary enforcement and protection following that. Now, you spoke about how kind of like jurisdictionally, or even there's these sections where law enforcement might be really responsive and other areas where they might not be when these orders are breached, which kind of, I think, addresses how police may typically respond, meaning there is no true typical response. But in your mind, what improvements can be made to police responses to protection orders to ensure survivor safety?
I would like to see more specialist training for officers and maybe a specialist unit to respond to these breaching reports. Because if funding only allows for training of some officers, then we want to make sure it's those officers that then respond, who aren't going to be making these judgments, who aren't going to be saying these things. That whilst that police officer will probably forget that they even said that remark about the bruising within the hour, that survivor is going that's going to play and play over again. Because if they think the police aren't going to believe them, then they'll maybe lose faith in the family law system. It's when they go and tell a judge about parenting arrangements that they think are necessary. Like they're going to believe that nobody will believe them. And we're here to reassure them that we do believe them and that absolutely is not a matter of physical bruising. That officer doesn't know the Family Law Act. And that officer doesn't determine how your life looks now going forward. So yeah, we need maybe some specialist units in the police that are trained and know how to respond with a trauma-informed approach.
Absolutely. That's so incredibly important. And I know there may be some, like the Vancouver PD has a domestic violence unit, right?
Mhm.
I'm not saying whether or not they have adequate training to respond. I'm just thinking provincially what we do have.
Mhm.
I'm aware that protection orders and peace bonds are only like a small step sort of in all of the legal protections and anti-violence protections that can be put in place. And what comes to mind for me is how kind of safety planning is often emphasized alongside legal protection orders, or sometimes even in the absence of them. Can you talk a little bit about why ongoing safety planning is so important and what it typically involves?
Yes. So the safety planning is important because at the end of the day, the protection order is a piece of paper. Granted, it's a piece of paper that carries legal consequences and enforceability, ideally, but it's not this magical force field. So we need a safety plan that complements that. And that can include things that stipulate who the survivor is going to call in an emergency. Like one of those answers may be the police, but another one also a relative, someone who they know is safe, understands what has happened, and also knows that they can call the police. But it's the way that they work together. Another term of the safety plan will include how many copies are we going to make of this order if one's given, which handbags are we going to put them in, how accessible are they going to be, what are you going to take with you if you flee, or if he finds you, where are you going to go? Because obviously, in an ideal world, a protection order is there, the survivor is found by the abuser, and so they call the police immediately and it's fine. But obviously, that doesn't undo the fact that he now knows where the survivor is. So a safety plan would include where to go when that happens. The plan will go some way to bridge the gap that exists due to the lack of collaboration that we spoke about earlier. And they should be complementary, like they'll go hand in hand.
Absolutely. And I don't do safety planning myself, but I've looked through some safety plans that were previously in place for survivors, and it's amazing the amount of thought that goes into all the really, really practical considerations that when in a state of duress or crisis, you wouldn't even consider. So you have all that stuff set up and you can get out or get to a safe space and you have what you need with you, among many other things. And so protection orders, peace bonds, and safety planning are important steps. But based on your research and your work at the policy level, are there, or even legal levels, are there policy changes or legal reforms that would improve the effectiveness of protection orders and peace bonds?
Um, so as mentioned, the police policy changes and maybe the creation of these units specifically for domestic violence. And we spoke about Vancouver having one of these units, but we also know that individuals in rural communities are those most likely to experience IPV. So we need to spread this much further than just Vancouver. Um, in terms of another policy reform we are advocating for is judicial training needs to be improved. And that is among provincial judges also, not just federal. And that means that they need to be alert to myths and stereotypes of family violence that continue to reappear in family court and protection order hearings in particular. And we need these judges to know them, to be able to recognize them, and to be able to condemn them and say that doesn't have a place in this proceeding. I'm not going to act upon that submission that you just made.
Absolutely. And I I'm always I get caught up in being sometimes in a large city where all these resources are available and you have to really remove yourself from your own context and think about where we need the services the most might not actually be where they're located. And because you look at funding and many things available in larger cities that aren't in rural and remote and northern areas. To sort of wrap up our conversation today, for survivors who may be hesitant to seek legal protection, what advice or resources would you recommend helping them to navigate the system safely?
So I took this question to my colleagues as well because I wanted to get counseling and short-term support work input on this. And the the resounding response was to have some kind of community support or victim support worker assisting. And like that is because we know, and the victim support workers know the nuances of safety plans, these specific things that need to be considered that just wouldn't cross a lawyer's mind, for example. The lawyer who is more often than not a legal aid lawyer, incredibly busy, or maybe they're duty counsel, they're just looking at the application the day of. Like, it's great that they're available and that these resources are there for survivors to get the legally enforceable mechanisms, but they're not considering those nuances that they don't then instruct the survivor as they leave court with their order. Look, you need to have a copy of this in this handbag. You need to make sure you've got the kids' documents. You need to make sure you've got somewhere for the pets to go if that's a concern. This transition house can be reached at this number, this one at this number. They work together. Like, a lawyer is great, but they're so busy, especially the resource one, the free resource lawyers, that they need to work together to get that. And the last thing I would suggest is not to be dismayed by the imperfect system, because there are individuals who will help. And at the end of the day, it is legally enforceable protection. So it is an important tool. It's not perfect, but I wouldn't be put off from applying.
And that I think is such an important takeaway is the system is imperfect, but it will still help you look for the right resources. And then just a question sort of that I have out of curiosity, because I'm always so interested kind of in research and outcomes, is for the justice or just a piece of paper report, what were the things that you found that you were either most interested in or most surprised about through that research? or things that really stood out to you?
So I came onto the project fresh out of university, naive, no idea, new to the organization as well. Um, and I was honestly most disappointed in the police responses. Um, Most disappointed in them, but probably most surprised by the judicial system. Because going through law school, you're like, these judges are amazing, they know everything. But when you read the survivors' experiences and what they've responded, like you see that maybe these judges are a little bit out of touch and they're not attuned to the reality of how family violence is experienced. Like it's great that we now have these provisions in law, but are they working? Like, and that takes us back to like letter of the law versus experience of the law. I think the judicial system is what surprised me. The police were most disappointing.
I get those feelings, and throughout doing this work and doing research on similar topics, those are outcomes that also really stood out to me as things I didn't necessarily expect until you learn the system and you realize that there are these larger gaps that compromise safety, and some judges and some officers may not be addressing the safety needs in a way we kind of thought they might, but absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Hannah. It's been such a joy to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been
Oh,
great.
anytime, truly. But thank you for your hard work, for sharing your knowledge today, and for such an important and influential piece of research.
Thanks for joining us on the Her Health podcast, transforming health for women and girls at risk. Remember, your health matters, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, remember to prioritize your health and well-being. For more resources and support on issues affecting girls, women, and gender-diverse people, visit our website at avatraining.ca. This is Dr. Nicole Letourneau. Thank you for listening.